The moment my mother-in-law called my daughter a nobody, something inside me broke. It wasn't said in private. It wasn't whispered behind closed doors. It happened in front of the entire family, over dinner, with my daughter sitting just a few feet away. And what hurt most was the look on Emma's face when she heard it. Emma wasn't biologically related to my husband's family. She was my daughter from my first marriage. When I married Mark, she was 6 years old, shy, thoughtful, and still learning to trust people again after the divorce. Braced her completely. He attended her school events, helped with homework, and taught her how to ride a bike. To him, she wasn't a stepdaughter. She was simply his daughter. But his mother, Diane, never saw it that way. From the beginning, she kept a polite distance. She wasn't openly cruel at first. Instead, she used small comments that seemed harmless on the surface. "Emma has your eyes," she would say to me, never including Mark. Or, "Mark is so good to help raise another man's child." Those words always landed like tiny stones dropped into still water. Small, but impossible to ignore. At family gatherings, the difference became more obvious. Diane would shower attention on her biological grandchildren. She knew their favorite snacks, celebrated every achievement, and filled her house with photos of them. Emma was rarely included in those conversations. One Christmas, each grandchild received a personalized gift. Ryan got a telescope because he loved science. Sophie got art supplies because she liked drawing. Emma received a generic gift card. "I wasn't sure what she'd like," Diane said with a smile. Emma thanked her politely, but later that night she asked me, "Did Grandma forget what I like?" I didn't know how to answer. A child who tried anyway. Despite everything, Emma kept trying. She made handmade birthday cards for Diane. She helped set the table during family dinners. She even learned Diane's favorite cookie recipe so she could surprise her one afternoon. Diane thanked her, but the warmth Emma hoped for never came. As Emma grew older, she became quieter around that side of the family. She stopped volunteering stories about school. She sat at the edge of family photos instead of in the center. It was as if she had learned not to expect a place that had never truly been offered. Mark noticed it too. One evening, after a particularly awkward family gathering, he said, "I don't understand why Mom can't just accept her." I sighed. Maybe she never will. That's not fair to Emma. He was right. But I also knew forcing acceptance rarely creates genuine love. The one person who treated her differently. There was one exception in the family, Grandpa Walter. Walter was Diane's father. He was in his mid-80s, retired, and had a gentle way of noticing people others overlooked while everyone else talked loudly around the dinner table. He would ask Emma about the books she was reading or the music she liked. Emma loved visiting him. They would sit on his porch for hours talking about history, old movies, and the strange gadgets he collected over the years. He never treated her as Mark's wife's daughter. He simply called her his granddaughter. That mattered more than anyone realized. The dinner that changed everything. The comment that changed everything happened during Thanksgiving. The whole family was gathered at Diane's house. The dining room was crowded with relatives, dishes, and overlapping conversations. Someone mentioned Grandpa Walter's famous coin collection and joked about which grandchild would inherit it one day. Diane laughed. "Well, obviously the real grandchildren will get something," she said. "Emma's just along for the ride." The room went silent. I felt my stomach drop. Emma froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. For a second, nobody seemed to know what to say. Then Grandpa Walter spoke from the end of the table. "What did you just say?" Diane shrugged as if it were obvious. "You know what I mean?" Walter's voice became firm. "No, I don't. She isn't biologically related to us," Diane replied. "That's just a fact." Walter looked at Emma, then back at Diane. "Facts are easy," he said. "Character is harder." He stood up slowly, walked around the table, and placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. But he has shown me more kindness, patience, and respect than most people I know. If you can't see that, the problem isn't her." Diane's face tightened, but she said nothing. The dinner continued awkwardly after that, but the atmosphere had changed. For the first time, someone had openly challenged Diane's behavior in front of everyone. After the dinner, On the drive home, Emma stared out the window. "Mom," she said quietly, "was she right?" My heart broke. "Absolutely not. But I'm not really part of the family." "Family isn't just biology," Mark said from the driver's seat. "Family is who loves you, shows up for you, and stands beside you. You're my daughter, Emma. Nothing changes that." She nodded, but I could tell the words still hurt. Over the next few months, something subtle happened. Emma and Grandpa Walter became even closer. She visited him regularly, helped him organize his coin collection, and listened to stories he had told many times before. Walter seemed happier during those visits. He often told me, "That girl has a good heart." Meanwhile, Diane acted as if the Thanksgiving incident had never happened. She remained cordial but distant. What none of us knew was that Grandpa Walter had been thinking deeply about what happened at that dinner. He had watched how people treated one another. He had noticed who visited him when they needed something, and who visited simply because they cared. And he was about to make a decision that would change the entire family forever. Because sometimes the people we dismiss become the ones who leave the greatest impression, and sometimes the quietest person at the table ends up changing the story for everyone else. That decision would come later, and when it did, nobody, especially Diane, was prepared for the consequences. Ready for Section 2? If you'd like, I'll continue with Section 2, the growing bond with Grandpa and the hidden change in the will, in the same detailed paragraph-style format. The cruelest words spoken at that Thanksgiving dinner should have been forgotten with time. But for Grandpa Walter, they became impossible to ignore. After that night, life appeared to return to normal on the surface. Family gatherings continued. Birthdays came and went. Holiday dinners happened exactly as they always had. But beneath the smiles and polite conversations, something had changed forever. Grandpa Walter couldn't forget the expression on Emma's face when Diane called her a nobody. He had seen pain before. He had lived a long life. He had experienced loss, disappointment, and heartbreak. But there was something particularly painful about watching a child question whether she belonged. And from that day forward, he paid closer attention than ever. Emma never complained. That was what impressed him most. She never argued with Diane. She never demanded attention. She never tried to force herself into family conversations. Instead, she continued being exactly who she had always been. Kind, patient, respectful. And somehow that made Diane's behavior seem even worse. Over the following months, Emma began spending more time with Walter. At first, it was just occasional visits. Then it became a routine. Every Saturday afternoon, she would stop by his house. Sometimes she brought homemade cookies. Sometimes she brought books she thought he might enjoy. Sometimes she simply sat beside him on the porch while they talked about life. Walter loved those conversations. Unlike many younger people, Emma actually listened. She wasn't waiting for her turn to speak. She wasn't staring at a phone. She genuinely cared about his stories, even the ones he had told several times before. And Walter noticed. One afternoon, while sorting through his famous coin collection, he looked at Emma and smiled. "You know, most people only ask about these coins because they think they're valuable." Emma laughed. "I ask because I like the stories." Walter nodded slowly. "Exactly." Then he handed her a small silver coin. It wasn't worth much money, but it had belonged to his grandfather. Emma held it carefully. "It's beautiful." Walter smiled. "Most people see a coin. I see history." Emma looked at him. "And I see why you love them." For a moment, Walter became emotional, because in that simple response, Emma had shown more understanding than many adults ever had. Meanwhile, the rest of the family rarely visited. Diane called occasionally. Her children stopped by during holidays. The grandchildren came when their parents brought them, but Emma came because she wanted to, and there was a huge difference. As the months passed, Walter quietly started noticing patterns. When family members visited, many conversations somehow turned toward money. Future plans, property, inheritance, investments. Who would get what someday? Walter never commented on it. He simply listened and remembered. One evening, after another family gathering, he sat alone in his study. The house was quiet. The same house where he had spent decades building memories. The same house everyone seemed interested in inheriting. He stared at old family photographs spread across his desk. There were pictures of birthdays, Christmas mornings, graduations, vacations, and in photo after photo, one thing became obvious. Emma was always there, smiling, helping, participating, trying. Yet somehow she was treated like an outsider. Walter shook his head. It didn't make sense. Family wasn't supposed to work that way. At least not in his eyes. A few weeks later, something happened that pushed him toward a decision. Walter slipped while walking down his front steps. The fall wasn't serious, but it scared him. At his age, even a small accident could become dangerous. He called several family members. Most were busy. Some promised to visit later, others never showed up. But when Emma heard about the fall, she arrived within an hour. She brought groceries. She helped organize medications. She cleaned parts of the house that had become difficult for Walter to manage alone. And most importantly, she stayed. Not because she had to, because she cared. Late that evening, Walter watched her wash dishes in the kitchen. Something became crystal clear. Blood didn't create loyalty, character did. And Emma had more character than many people twice her age. That night, Walter made a phone call. Not to a family member. To his attorney. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Nobody knew about it, not Diane, not Mark, not even Emma. The following Tuesday, Walter sat across from his attorney in a quiet office. The attorney reviewed documents carefully. "Are you sure you want to make changes?" he asked. Walter didn't hesitate. "Absolutely," the attorney adjusted his glasses. "May I ask why?" Walter smiled. "Because I've finally had enough time to see people for who they really are." Over the next hour, they discussed every detail, every asset, every possession, every instruction. Walter was calm, certain, focused. When the meeting ended, the attorney looked surprised. "Your family may have strong reactions." Walter stood up slowly. "That's their choice." Then he added something the attorney would never forget. "I'm not rewarding blood. I'm rewarding love." Months continued to pass. Emma had no idea any of this was happening. She kept visiting every weekend, helping, listening, laughing with Walter, creating memories. Meanwhile, Diane remained exactly the same. If anything, her behavior became colder. She still referred to Emma differently than the other grandchildren, still kept her at arm's length, still acted as though biology was the only thing that mattered, and every time she did, Walter noticed. But he said very little. He simply watched, observed, waited, because some lessons don't need arguments. Some lessons reveal themselves with time. Then one afternoon during a family barbecue, Diane made another comment, a small one, but Walter heard it. Someone mentioned family traditions. Diane laughed and said, "Well, some traditions are only for actual family members." Emma pretended not to hear, but Walter saw the pain in her eyes, and in that moment any remaining doubt disappeared. His decision was final, completely final. The changes had already been signed, the documents had already been filed, and the future had already been set into motion. The irony was almost unbelievable. The person Diane considered the least important member of the family had become the person Walter trusted most. But nobody knew. Not yet. Because the biggest surprise was still waiting. And when the day finally came for Walter's final wishes to be revealed, the room would fall completely silent. Especially Diane. Because she was about to discover that the words we speak to others sometimes return in ways we never expect. And Grandpa Walter had made sure his final message would be impossible to ignore. Nobody expected Grandpa Walter's final goodbye to become the moment that changed the entire family forever. The years eventually caught up with him. Walter was still sharp, still kind, still full of stories. But age was beginning to slow him down. The man who once spent hours working in his garden now needed help carrying groceries. The man who could once walk miles around town now became tired after a short trip outside. Yet through all of it, one thing never changed. Emma continued showing up. Every week, every month, every season. She never treated her visits like an obligation. She treated them like a privilege, and Walter never forgot that. One autumn afternoon, Emma sat beside him on the porch as golden leaves drifted through the air. Walter looked unusually thoughtful. For several minutes, he simply watched the trees, then he smiled. "You know, Emma, people spend their whole lives trying to figure out what really matters." Emma looked at him curiously. "What did you figure out?" Walter chuckled softly. "That's the funny part. The answer is much simpler than people think." "What is it?" He looked directly at her. "It's not money," Emma smiled. "I figured you'd say that. It's not status either." "What about success?" Walter shook his head. "No, then what is it?" For a moment his eyes became emotional. "It's who sits beside you when there's nothing to gain." Emma didn't fully understand the significance of those words at the time, but later she would remember every single one, because they would become the key to understanding everything that happened afterward. As winter approached, Walter's health declined more rapidly. His doctor recommended more rest. Family members started visiting more frequently. Suddenly, people who hadn't appeared in months were stopping by. Some brought flowers, others brought gifts. A few offered help. On the surface, it looked caring. But Walter noticed something interesting. Many conversations eventually drifted toward the future, toward finances, toward property, toward inheritance. Questions hidden behind polite smiles. Comments disguised as concern, and each time it happened, Walter quietly listened. One afternoon Diane visited. At first, the conversation seemed normal. Then she casually asked, "Dad, have you thought about how everything will be divided?" Walter looked at her. "Everything. The house, the collection, the savings." Walter remained silent. Diane continued, "It would be terrible if things became complicated later." Walter gave a small nod. "I agree." Diane smiled, but she misunderstood his response. Because Walter wasn't agreeing with her concerns. He was confirming his own decision. A decision that had already been made. A decision nobody could change. Weeks later, Walter's condition worsened. The family gathered more often. Hospital visits became common. Phone calls increased. Concern filled every conversation. Then one quiet morning, the call finally came. Grandpa Walter had peacefully passed away. The news hit everyone hard. Regardless of family conflicts, Walter had been loved. He had been the center of many memories, the keeper of family stories, the person who could make everyone laugh. And now he was gone. The funeral brought the family together. For a few hours, old arguments disappeared. People shared stories, laughed through tears, remembered happier times. Emma struggled the most. Not because she expected anything from Walter, but because she had genuinely loved him. He was the one person who had never made her feel different, never made her feel unwanted, never made her feel like she had to earn her place. As she stood near his photograph, tears filled her eyes. Mark wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "I just wish I could hear one more story." Mark smiled sadly. Across the room, Diane watched quietly. For once, she seemed softer, more reflective. But nobody knew what was coming next. A few weeks after the funeral, the family received a call from Walter's attorney. The will would be read the following Friday. Everyone was invited. And just like that, anticipation filled the family. Most people tried pretending they weren't curious, but curiosity was impossible to hide. Questions started circulating. Who would receive the house? Who would inherit the coin collection? Would everything be divided equally? No one knew, especially not Emma. In fact, Emma almost didn't attend. She felt uncomfortable. The inheritance discussion didn't feel like her place. "I'm not expecting anything," she told Mark. "You should still come," he replied. "Why?" "Because you were family to him." Simple words, yet powerful. The family gathered inside the attorney's office. The atmosphere felt strange, part grief, part tension, part anticipation. Everyone sat around a large conference table. The attorney entered carrying a thick folder. After offering condolences, he opened the file. The room became silent, completely silent. The reading began. Walter had left gifts to friends, donations to several charities, specific possessions to different relatives. The process took nearly an hour. Everything seemed fairly normal. Then they reached the section everyone had been waiting for. The major assets, the house, the savings, the investments, the coin collection. Diane straightened in her chair. Several relatives exchanged glances. The attorney continued reading. Walter's house would be sold. The proceeds would be divided equally among his grandchildren. A few heads nodded. Nothing shocking yet. Then the attorney read the names Ryan, Sophie, Jacob, and Emma. The room froze. Emma blinked, certain she had heard wrong. Diane immediately sat upright. "What?" The attorney looked down at the document, then repeated it. "Ryan, Sophie, Jacob, and Emma." Silence. Absolute silence. You could almost feel the air leave the room. Diane's face changed instantly. Shock, confusion, disbelief, all at once. "There must be a mistake," she said. The attorney calmly shook his head. "There is no mistake." Diane looked around the room. "Emma isn't..." She stopped herself, but everyone knew exactly what she had been about to say. Emma isn't really family. The same argument, the same belief, the same prejudice. The attorney continued before anyone could interrupt. "There is an additional instruction regarding the coin collection." Now everyone paid attention. Walter's coin collection was famous within the family. Many assumed it would be divided. Others assumed it would go to one of the biological grandchildren. Nobody expected what came next. The attorney cleared his throat, then read directly from Walter's words. "My complete coin collection shall be left to Emma." The room exploded with disbelief. Several relatives gasped. One cousin nearly dropped his coffee. Diane's jaw literally fell open. Emma looked stunned, completely stunned. She wasn't thinking about value, she wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about the afternoons spent listening to Walter explain where each coin came from. The stories, the memories, the conversations. To everyone else it was a collection. To Walter and Emma, it was something much deeper. The attorney raised a hand for silence. "There is one final statement Mr. Walter requested be read aloud." The room became quiet once more. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The attorney unfolded a separate page, then began reading Walter's final message, and the words that followed would leave Diane completely speechless. The lesson Walter wanted the family to hear had finally arrived, and there would be no way to argue with it. Because these weren't the words of an angry relative. These were the final words of the man they had all come to honor. And what he wrote was about to change everything. The room was silent. Every eye was fixed on the attorney as he unfolded the final page. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Diane, who had spent the last few minutes arguing about the will, suddenly became quiet. Because everyone understood something. These weren't legal instructions anymore. These were Grandpa Walter's final words. His final message. The last thing he wanted his family to hear. The attorney adjusted his glasses and began reading. "My family, if you are hearing this message, it means I am no longer here to say these words myself. For that reason, I hope everyone listens carefully." The room remained completely still. The attorney continued. "Over the last years of my life, I was given a gift that many people never receive. I had time. Time to observe. Time to reflect. Time to learn who people truly are when they think nobody is watching." Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. The words already felt personal. Then the attorney continued. "I have watched family members support one another. I have watched kindness. I have watched generosity. But I have also witnessed exclusion, judgment, and behavior that disappointed me deeply." Diane's expression immediately tightened. The attorney kept reading. "Family is not created by blood alone. Family is created through love, loyalty, compassion, and presence. The people who stand beside us when they have nothing to gain become our true family." Emma slowly lowered her eyes. Tears were already forming, because she knew exactly who Walter was talking about, and so did everyone else. The attorney paused briefly before reading the next paragraph. "One of the greatest mistakes people make is believing that biology automatically makes someone more valuable than another person. In my experience, character matters far more than genetics." The room became even quieter. If a pin had fallen onto the floor, everyone would have heard it. Then came the sentence that nobody would ever forget. Especially Diane. "To anyone who ever made Emma feel less important, less worthy, or less loved because she did not share our blood, I hope you spend the rest of your life reconsidering what family truly means." The impact was immediate. Several relatives lowered their heads. Others looked directly at Diane. Nobody said her name. Nobody needed to. Walter had said everything for them. Diane's face turned pale. For years she had hidden behind polite comments and subtle exclusions. For years she had convinced herself she was simply stating facts. Now those actions were being exposed by the one person whose opinion she respected most, her own father. And there was nothing she could do about it. The attorney continued reading. "Emma never visited anything. She never helped because she wanted a reward. She never listened to my stories because she hoped to receive my possessions." Emma covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. The attorney smiled softly and continued. "She visited because she cared." For a moment the room felt emotional. Even some relatives who had never paid much attention to Emma found themselves becoming emotional. Because deep down they knew Walter was right. Everyone had seen it. Emma had shown up again and again. Not for inheritance, not for recognition. Simply because she loved him. The attorney then reached the final paragraph. Walter's last paragraph. His final lesson. His final goodbye. "If there is one thing I want my family to remember after I am gone, it is this. The world already has enough people who judge others by appearances, backgrounds, and circumstances. Be the people who judge others by their hearts, because hearts reveal character, and character reveals everything." The attorney lowered the page. The reading was over. The room remained silent, not because people were confused, because they were affected. For the first time, everyone had been forced to confront a truth they had ignored for years. Emma had never been the outsider. The real problem had been how others chose to treat her, and now Walter had made sure nobody could deny it. A few moments later, relatives slowly began approaching Emma, one by one. Some hugged her, some apologized, some simply offered kind words, not because of the inheritance, not because of the coin collection, because Walter's message had opened their eyes. Meanwhile, Diane remained seated, alone, quiet, staring at the table. For perhaps the first time in years, she had no argument, no defense, no explanation. Everything she might have said had already been answered by Walter's letter. Eventually, people began leaving the office. The crowd slowly disappeared. Only a handful remained. Emma stood near the doorway, preparing to leave, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around. It was Diane. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence felt uncomfortable. Then Diane finally looked at Emma. Really looked at her. Not as someone outside the family, not as someone different, simply as Emma. Her voice was quieter than usual. "I didn't expect any of this." Emma nodded gently. "I know." Diane swallowed hard. For a moment, it looked as though she was struggling to find the right words. Then she finally said something nobody expected. "I was wrong." Emma stared at her. Years of pain, years of rejection, years of feeling unwanted, and now, after all that time, those 3 words had finally arrived. I was wrong. The apology wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no grand speech, but it was real, and somehow that mattered. Emma smiled softly. Not because everything had been fixed, not because the past had disappeared, but because healing could finally begin. Later that evening, our family gathered at home. The mood felt completely different, peaceful, reflective, almost lighter. The inheritance was discussed only briefly. Because surprisingly, it wasn't what anyone remembered most. What everyone remembered was Walter's message, his lesson, his final act of justice. Emma eventually placed the coin collection inside a display cabinet, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a symbol of love. Every coin reminded her of a conversation, a memory, a story shared on a quiet afternoon, and every time she looked at it, she remembered the man who had believed in her when others refused to. Years later, people would still talk about Walter's final words, not because they changed a will, because they changed hearts. And that's the part nobody saw coming. You see, revenge doesn't always arrive through anger. Sometimes revenge arrives through truth. Sometimes justice comes without shouting, without fighting, without destroying anyone. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply being recognized for who you truly are, while those who judged you are forced to confront their own mistakes. Emma never set out to prove anyone wrong. She never demanded acceptance. She never fought for recognition. She simply remained kind. And in the end, kindness accomplished what arguments never could. Because Grandpa Walter left behind something far more valuable than money. He left behind a lesson that every person in that room would carry forever. Family isn't defined by blood. Family is defined by love. And in the end, love was the inheritance that mattered most. The end.